Hello, everybody. This is Isaac with Programmable Audio with the Mix with a Newb series. I'm going to do part 3, part 2. That's a joke for Josh, my partner. But in all seriousness, instead of moving on to part 4, I do want to kind of revamp part 3 because I left kind of feeling unsatisfied. I spent a lot of time kind of fumbling around, and let's just start the episode off by saying that as a very beginning person, if you're learning to mix or record, whatever your role is, as a beginner, you're going to have a lot of uncertainty, you're going to feel lost, and that there's so much information to take in that you'll never get it. And I want to encourage you to just relax a little bit on that and not worry too much, because there is an ocean of information out there. Most of it's good, some of it's not so good. Some of it will apply to what you're doing, some of it will not. Some of it will make sense, some will not. So don't get frustrated. You can experiment as much as you need to. Don't be worried. There's no right or wrong way to do any of this. And you'll hear this repeatedly. There is no set way to do anything with music. Except there are some exceptions, which is if you need to make a certain type of music genre, if it needs to sound like this specific thing, there can be a right and wrong way to get that sound coming out. If you want it to sound like the pop music trend of the day, then there might be a right and wrong way to do that. If you want it to sound like whatever the current state of music, whatever vocals, all vocals are auto-tuned, and people are doing crazy stuff with vocals now. So maybe there's a right and wrong way to produce that final end result to make it sound like something current. But in general, overall, there's no right or wrong way to do any of this stuff. And I'm saying that because yesterday, when I did my part 3, part 1, I fumbled around a lot, and I could feel it, and it was embarrassing, but I'm going to move on. So today, we're going to re-look at trying to make the kick, and I'm going to move the mic here. I hope it doesn't make too much of a noise. Trying to make the kick and bass work together in a mix, okay? So I have bass guitar, kick drum. This is the song Digging Holes. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to recreate that bus that we had yesterday, punch bus, okay? The goal here, what I'd like to do is I want to get the bass and the kick outputting at about -3 decibels at their peak, okay? Leaving enough headroom below 0, but getting them to a level where they're almost the loudest thing in the mix. Almost. Okay? So I've shown you a couple of different ways of routing. One is the routing matrix, which is just a cross. You just follow down from a track or over, and you mark what you want. Okay, we've done that briefly. I will go over that in detail in a separate video because it's intuitive and easy once you figure it out, but it can be daunting at first. It can look like nonsense. The second way is to right click over the little routing box here, and you can do the drop downs here for sends and receives. And a third way to do this, you can drag this little box. So I want to send this bass up to my punch bus. And I meant to color my punch bus a special color. So I right-clicked on this, and I'm going to do track color, set track to custom color. And let's go black. Okay. So that's black. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Anyway, what happens when I click off of that? Okay, so it's dark. It doesn't really matter. I probably won't leave this punch bus. This is just as an exercise to help us if we bring these two elements up to where they're almost at the ceiling, then we can then fill in the guitar and the vocals, the cymbals, and all the other stuff that's vital to the mix, but isn't sort of like the centerpiece of the mix, because this is a hard rock punk song, so I consider the bass and the kick, primary. And I'm biased because I'm the bass player, but a lot of the guitar parts are kind of repetitive and simplistic, and that's fine because a lot of punk songs are, a lot of rock songs are. That's no big deal. The guitar player plays pretty well. The vocals are okay. They're exciting. Actually, I really like the message of this song. It was written by a former Marine, so it has some really cool lyrics. But for my taste, me being the mixer, what I'm doing here is I'm mixing to my taste. So I want that kick and, I'm going to brush myself off here. I want, that's embarrassing. I had food from dinner. I want my kick and bass to be prime, I keep using the word prime, and I guess I'm okay with using that, to be like the alpha, to be the thing that's right up in front and pure and good sounding. So they're never stepped on by anything else, and they kind of drive the song along. At a certain point, what I'll probably do is try to make the bass and guitar sort of level. And then later on, we'll talk about making those different elements work well together with some like automation and just EQ and volume and tricks like that. So anyway, I've just begun to touch on kind of like where I want to take the mix. If you were listening to those last few sentences, that's sort of like a rough roadmap for me of where we're going to take this mix and where we're going to try to get with it. Okay, so what I want to do, I got sidetracked on the routing part. So I'm going to take the bass bus here. I should just label this bus. I got away from labeling it bus because I know it's a bus because it's the main folder, the head folder for this group. But just so that visually on the screen it makes sense if I say bus. Okay, so I have my kick bus and my bass bus, and I'm going to send them to the punch bus. So that'd be like a sub bus, I guess. I don't know. Again, you're going to hear a lot of terminology and things. There's no right way to say it. If I say sub bus, whatever. Routing bus, auxiliary bus maybe. So I'm going to drag the little box up here. See, notice the cursor changes to this little plug. Drop it on here, and then it gives me options here. If you wanted, at this point, you can change. If you want to mess with the channels, that's where you can do this. If you're going to do like a side chain type thing, here's where you would mute. There's different things here you can do. You can select between post and pre-fader, which is an important thing later when you're mixing. Again, probably a good topic for another video. So anyway, this little box pops up, and you just X out, and it's already there. And the way to double check this, if you hover over, it shows you right there, receives, track 13, bass bus folder. You can also right click and hover over your receives and make sure that it's checked. So there it is. And then we're going to drop down to the kick bus. Same thing, drag it up, drop it, it's there. Okay, we're going to solo this. Now, what I've done is I've isolated in the mix a nice strong bass hit on the bass guitar here. So this is me plucking, this is me not plucking but slapping. It's a slap. Bong. I believe it's an open E. If you scroll down below, here's a kick hit. They line up right over each other, and they should be lined up right over the click, but I think they're both a little bit off. So there's a click, you can see it. It kind of looks awkward, right? Here's my click track. A click is like this square looking blip, and it's right on the measure, but we're not. We're slightly early, and that's, again, I've said this in the past. Well, the kick is like right on top of it. Slightly early, but that's because we're humans and we're not perfectly lockstep with the click. We want to be riding on top of it so we don't, over the course of the track get lost. But you can tell right there, that's what it looks like when humans play over a click track. They're going to be slightly early or slightly late. Once you zoom out, you're not too far off. It's only when you zoom into this level, and we could actually do a quick measurement here. And Reaper will show you here, up here is your little length of time selection. See when I hover over? So that is 5 milliseconds, right? Because this would be tenths of a second. This would be seconds, right? Yeah, minutes, seconds, tenths, and thousandths of a second. So milli meaning, thousandths of 1/1000th of a second. So I'm 5 milliseconds behind the click. I'm okay with that. I can live with it. I could come in here and time align it, but I'm not going to, because what ends up happening is it takes away the organic feel of it, which organic is a term I don't really like very much. It's just it's just one of those, it's overused and it's sort of fuzzy. It almost doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean, yeah, in the grocery store it means overpriced and with a promise of some sort of cleanliness that may or may not be true. So anyway, also one quick thing to note here, these two look like they might be out of phase. And so we're going to flip the phase on one of these, which is just right here. Phase is a thing that is very, very hard to understand when you're beginning. I still don't fully understand it. I believe I have a grasp on it. It has to do with sound waves either being perfectly lined up and sounding amazing together, or being out of sync and canceling each other out completely or partially and sounding bad, weak, or... So if I flip the phase on one of these kicks, this is two separate mics that captured the kick drum. One was outside the kick drum and one was inside. I explained that in an earlier video. If you flip the phase on one of them, that helps line them up in the output. Okay, it won't change the waveform here. It'll still look the same, but it will just invert. So these will actually line up better. It doesn't look like they're that off. I mean, visually it's hard to tell. You can definitely hear when something starts to go out of phase. You can hear it just gets weak and weird. So anyway, I'm getting off track. So now what we have, I highlighted this section. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit before that first bass hit right there. See, because we're going to be getting both of these notes coming through at the same time. All right, so we're feeding the two kick hits and the bass note to our punch bus. And so I'm going to open up my plugin here, click on FX. I already had audio typed in there, so I'm going to clear this out. Again, I could search through it here manually, which will take you a long time, or I can start typing using the filter and type in. Now, audio statistics should be near the top because it starts with an A. So it's a JavaScript JS plugin. I'm pretty sure it means JavaScript. I keep saying that. Anyway, here it is, audio statistics. So I found it manually, or again, using this filter is amazing. You just do AUDI. There it is. And another quick way would have been, because I know it's a JavaScript one, just click in there. That filters out everything except the JavaScript ones. And then just kind of scroll down quick. And where is it? Audio statistics. I keep going back to this thing about finding plugins because Reaper comes with quite a few. And if you begin buying them or downloading free ones, pretty soon your list is going to be enormous. And you're not going to want to go through one by one and look, distortion, compression. You want to get used to using that filter and finding exactly what you need quickly. All right, so we have the audio statistic tool open here. And again, the whole point of this is to get a numerical readout of, let me plug my headphones in here. You can do this stuff by ear, and a lot of the mixing advice you'll get out there says you should get away from looking at charts and graphs and numbers and use your ears. And I agree with that in a way, but for most of us that know how to use computers really well, who grew up using computers, there's comfort or familiarity with, looking at a program and being able to see like raw data, kind of like, I'm trying to think, okay, like if you're using if you have a job and you have to use like Excel or something, and somebody makes some like nice, chart or something, and they say, well, here's the figures for the fourth quarter earning projection, blah, blah, blah. There's that first initial, like, okay, I can see the graph and whatever, but if we're going to talk about this stuff in depth, the data, then you want to look at numbers, right? You want to actually like, can you pull up the spreadsheet and let's look at, it's a pretty bad example, but anyway, to use a tool like this does let you look at this, the output numerically. And if that's the kind of brain you have, this is what you want, okay? If you can mix by ear completely, more power to you. You can just tweak these volumes until the kick and the bass sound like they're almost, you don't want them clipping, but you want them right below the ceiling. Give that a try. It never seemed to work for me. I always seem to need a visual. A graph is great. Like with EQ, it's really awesome to see the waveform and to see where your points are and where you're cutting and stuff. A lot of people EQ just by ear, and they'll have something like this with no chart and everything, and they're just tweaking knobs and stuff and listening. It's all about what's comfortable for you. But okay, I got off on a tangent again. I'm sorry. I'm going to hit play. Now, I'm going to caution you because actually what I think I can do, I'm going to mute the main output here. So I'm going to just hit the main mute on the master channel. And I hope that doesn't kill your ears in the recording, because what I've done is like I said, I've isolated just that one hit and I have it on a loop. So it's actually going to run through, and it's basically the point of doing that is that we're having the audio statistic plugin just analyze the output for that little slice. That's it. Okay. And actually, okay. The first thing I want to do, I'm going to just have it look at the kick. So I'm going to mute the bass bus, and I'm going to hit. Okay. So what this tells us is if you scan down here, here's your peak left and right. This bass kick is peaking at -20. That seems very low, and there's a reason for that, because as a beginning audio engineer, when I was in the recording room, I had all my gains turned rather low. -20 is not horrible. What I've heard is you want to target like around -18. So it's not bad, but it's low. So if we're going to, bring the combined signal up to about -3, let's just throw some quick numbers around. That would be like -17, divide that by half. That would be what? Like 8.5. I'd have to add 8.5 to the kick and 8.5 to the bass, roughly. And I don't think we don't even have that much. We have about 8 decibels of headroom that I gave myself. So, actually that's not correct, because these are turned down here too. So let's set these all to 0, and let's try that again. So again, as you're going through this stuff, there's gonna be a point where you're gonna figure out what exactly works for you. Okay. So I'm gonna reset this back to default. All right. So again, I have the bass muted, so all we're getting is the kick. So when I hit the space bar to play, it's going to run through that loop, and it's going to analyze just the output of the kick, and it's going to display it here on audio statistics. All right. So there we go, -25. Actually, why did it got quieter? Wow, I did not expect that. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm looking at my total loudness rather than the peak. Okay, here's my peak. Peak and RMS. Quick, brief explanation of that. The last time I attempted this, I got off on this thing about RMS. Peak is the loudest point that came out. And if you think about that, like in home speakers or car speakers, they always list your peak wattage output and your like operating or normal wattage output. And so that has to do with, as you're playing music, there's parts that just spike. They're just like something kicks, and that's like as high as it'll possibly go. That's the peak. And then there's this RMS, which stands for root mean squared. So you take the root, you take a square root of the signal, and you're looking at like it depends on the window that you're looking at. It could be a 1 millisecond window, it could be 10, it could be 30. There's different ways to adjust how much of the signal you're actually looking at. So we look at the whole signal, we measure it, we take a square root of it, we take the mean of that. If you know what mean is from mathematics, it's like the middle number, right? Roughly. And then we square that. So we're, square root and squaring something is like inverse. So you're, if that makes sense, it's like, again, I struggle to explain this, but when I think of it in my head, it makes sense. It's almost like a level measurement of the sound. Like, how would I explain this? If you think about it, like in terms of pressure, like a hose. If you want to measure the output of a hose, like you could measure how much water does it put out in an hour. 1,000 gallons per hour. Well, that tells you per hour. That's great. But what if you wanted to know like how much water does it put out in 10 seconds? Well, just like output of sound, that hose might at times, spurt and put out a peak of, 25 ounces or whatever. So this RMS is a way of getting like an even measurement over a certain amount of time, because you're mathematically like smoothing it out. You're taking the square root of it, you're taking the mean, like the very middle point of the high and the low of that window, and then you're squaring that again. So you're like undoing that square root. So if that makes any sense, it didn't make sense to me in the beginning, but it is what it is. You could probably read 25 articles about what this RMS means. We're going to move on. So anyway, just think of it as like your average level, and then your peak. We all know what peak means. Okay, so my kick is peaking at about -12. So if I want my bass and my kick together combined to hit about -3, we might be in the right ballpark. If the bass is roughly, let's look at the bass. The bass is already at -3. Okay, this is because I adjusted it on a previous attempt. So I'm going to bring this back down to -8, which is where I wanted everything for my headroom, roughly. And that's, again, that's an arbitrary number. You could have started at -10, -12. It doesn't matter. It's just lowering it from 0 so that you're not starting with, everything needs to come down. Let's bring everything back up. Start with everything low and just sort of creep things up to where you want them. All right. So I unmuted the bass bus. I know that I have about 9 decibels to go, right? -12 to -3, would that be 9? Is my math correct? Yeah. Okay, I can math. All right. So we have about -9 decibels to go to hit that -3 goal, right? And again, it doesn't have to be -3 decibels. You could go for -1. It's just at -3 decibels, if that's going to be my loudest element, the combination of the bass and the kick, if that's going to be my loudest element, and it might only be the loudest element by a tiny little bit. It's not going to be like, that's all I can hear. You're going to hear all the other elements. So if we have that at -3, when you output the track, there's still that little bit of headroom, which someone later, like a master engineer, can use that headroom to then transform the track. You may be the master engineer, and once you start reading about what mastering is, you're going to start to see you need headroom. You can't have the mix engineer send you a wave output that's, a stem that's all blown out. You don't have anywhere to go from there. So that's why I go with the -3. It still gives that nice little gap, but it's close to 0. And it's loud enough that if I do an output mix that I want to test in my car or on my speakers, it's pretty close. I can turn the speakers up a little extra to make up for that gap. So anyway, that's why I just picked -3. Okay, it could be you see a tutorial somewhere else and they'll say, no, you need to be at -6. You need to be at -1. Whatever the number is, that's what I'm aiming for, right or wrong. It's nice to be a noob. All right. So I unmuted the bass, and what we want to do is reset. So just remember, -12 was our peak, and -9 to add 9 decibels, not -9, but to add 9 decibels would get us to right where we are. But now we're going to listen to them combined and see exactly where the peak is. So here I'm going to hit play again, and you'll see it bouncing through. Bounce, 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 bounce. Okay. All right. So it looks like I'm at negative 12. All right. See, that doesn't make any sense. Let me just make sure. Yeah, we should be getting. Yeah, both should be coming through. Yeah, we're receiving from the bass bus and the kick bus. I unmuted the bass bus. All right. That's really strange. So I wonder if muting this, you know what I think I need to do is mute the send. So let's, okay, so if you just do a single click on the punch bus here, you can look at your sends, and I think we actually need to mute from here. I believe this is what I really need to do to make sure that this punch bus isn't receiving, because I think that negative 12, clearly I unmuted the bass bus and I'm still getting negative 12 as my peak. All right, so I'm going to reset this again. Hit space. No, okay. So here again, I'm just exploring and I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about. There's probably there might be somebody watching this video right now screaming, going, "This is what you need to do." Okay, so maybe here from the bass bus, this is the fader. This tells you how much signal it's sending. I'm going to put that to negative infinity, and let's try that. Okay, I'm going to just put this to the side because I need to come back to it. And we're going to reset this again. Yeah, and we're still getting negative 12. Okay, so yeah, see, I clearly don't know what I'm doing, and that's okay. Let's see here. So we're getting, I'm going to mute both of these and see. And again, now I'm experimenting. Okay, so that did it. That silenced both of them. But that's not exactly what I want. But I do know that will, okay. So let's put this back. All right, so my kick is at negative 12. Let's try, I'm going to silence the kick and I'm going to undo the bass and put the bass back up and reset this. For some reason, that negative 12 number, I guess I was getting from both channels. Okay, see. So the bass is putting a peak of negative 15. So based on the way I had my routing and stuff set up, and I thought that if I just muted here on the folder, that it would mute in the send, but that's not the case. So that negative 12 number, let's divide that by 2, so that's 6. So let's boost both by 6, okay? And again, I'm half experimenting here, but I'm half going with something that I've used in the past to begin my mix. It's kind of a thing that I developed on my own, but I will give credit to the guy's name is, his name always escapes me because I think he has a kind of a plain name, but Graham. His name's Graham, and the channel is Recording Revolution. And this is a person who I give props to. I'm slipping into kind of podcast mode. I put out a podcast, my very first one. There'll be a link to it. I'll put the link in the show notes, in the video notes. And in that, I mentioned a lot of my influencers, and I briefly mentioned him as saying that he's not one and only because there's a couple of reasons. He uses Pro Tools a lot, and the genre of music he mixes is completely not up my alley, so it takes me out of the mix. So anyway, I'm really getting off track, but my point is, this method I took from a suggestion he came up with, which was send your kick and bass to a VU meter. Like, he uses a visual old school meter with the needle, right? And he was looking for it to peak at -3. Okay, so I kind of stole it from him. I didn't, I'm using statistics instead of a simulated analog dial. So I'm doing it differently than he does, and I'm crediting him. So this is where this idea came from. So the number was -12. We want to go to -3. So that's again, that's 9, right? 6, 7, 8. Yes, no, 7. Yeah, it's 9. So let's boost both by 4.5 dB and see what that gets us on the plugin here. Okay. So this is at -8, and we want to go add 4.5 dB to it. So that would bring us to 3.5. Is that correct? I believe that's correct. Yeah, I can math. All right. 3.5. Again, I'm fine-tuning by holding down Control. We'll go a little over because it doesn't want to settle right on 3.5. It jumps. There we go, 3.53. All right, and then the kick bus, we're also going to go, or the drum. You know what? This kick bus has been at 0. Wow, okay. This is troubling because I thought I had this set at -8. Oh, boy. All right, so again, you're watching the Newb, the Newbness unfolding. All right, I set that back to -8. I thought I had it there anyway. And let's put this one back to -8. Oh my God. I hope you guys are chuckling along with me or laughing at me, and I hope you didn't just turn the video off, because I know it can be painful to watch, but this is how you learn, and this is how I learn. All right. Let's go back up, make sure, yeah. All right, so our peak is actually, all right, so we're at -15. We're rounding up to 15. We need to go to -3. That's 12 dB, which is a nice number that we can divide in 2. So we need to add 6 dB to each thing, to each element. 6 to the bass and 6 to the kick bus. So that's easy because, see, my only concern here is that I have my drum bus at, but I guess it doesn't matter because that's the output of this kick when I route it is just the number. It doesn't matter anyway. I'm going to go ahead and add 6 to this. Let's see here. So we're going to bring this to -2 dB. And this one to -2. And this actually might not even be, like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm just fumbling around for a solution, and I hope this works. The reason I'm doing this is I hope to reproduce this method on all the other tracks that I need to mix. All right, here we go. Moment of truth. Yeah, okay, so our peak now is -9. See, it's not quite working the way that I think it should. And there's something going on here. I think it has to do with the fact that I'm choking this kick bus. I'm sending it through the drum bus, which I already have at -8. There's got to be something there with that, okay? So let's do this. I'm going to put this to 0. I'm going to put this to 0. And here's my thinking with the drum bus. Because I know I recorded all of these drums very, very quiet, and you can see it in their waveforms, you know, they're very soft. Like they're nowhere near peaking. Although I think if you look at the snare, occasionally he hit that snare so damn hard, which is a common drummer thing, I think, you know, especially when you have, you know, he had like a fancy like Kevlar head, and it sounded like a damn gunshot when he would hit it. So that's cool. That's whatever. So I think because my thought is this, I have the drums recorded very quietly, so I'm okay putting the drum bus to 0 because I've already built in a ton of headroom into the tracks themselves. So by further reducing it by 8 decibels, they're much too quiet. So that's why I think I'm getting like a false sense of what I'm trying to do here. So let's set this back. It's reset, and again I have my bass. I brought my bass to -2, and I have my kick and drum bus back to 0. So what we get. All right, so there we go, -8. That's going to be fine, and especially because we're only looking at one hit. I have to remember that. It's actually closer to -9. So that's not quite what I was really hoping to do. Let's see if I put this all the way. I guess the thing to look at would be, all right, so it's -7. That's not bad. -7, that's not bad. I guess I need it to be a little bit louder, but that can always come later. What I want to do now is I'm going to actually have it play a larger section of the song and see how much that varies. Okay, and this should give us a picture. This -7 decibels is for that single bass note, single kick hit. Okay, when I spread out the window that we're looking at, it's going to change what the plugin picks up for statistics. So here we go, reset to default, and I'm hitting play. Okay. So I'm watching over here. You can see where my mouse is. Let me move this more to the center. All right. So now I'm seeing that my kick and my bass. Okay, this is probably okay. I'm going to be okay with this. This is kind of working out the way I hoped. It's actually closer to -4. That's fine, because again, you can always add more with plugins. You can add gain with any plug. You know, there's EQ and there's several different plugins where you can just add gain as much as you need to. So I'm going to say mission accomplished here. What you see is when we run a larger section and we're having the plugin look at, okay, where did it peak? What was the loudest moment of just the kick hits and just the bass guitar? We're not talking about anything else yet. We're not talking about vocals or guitar or any other the elements of the drum kit like the snare. The snare is very peaky. The snare you'll have, you know, spikes because the way it, just the nature of the drum itself, and depending on your drummer as well. So we looked at a longer section of the song, and this plugin is telling me the loudest that the two ever get, because remember it's a confluence, it's the two coming together. The loudest that they ever get together is about -4 decibels. So I still have that 4 decibel headroom to work with if I'm considering the bass and the kick as my two loudest elements. So I'm happy with this. And then you can look at the average, the RMS is like around -24 decibels. So there's room to work with there. Now this number, in the future we could change that with compression as an example. There's things that we can do. We can normalize. There's things we can do to get that the disparity between the peak and the average, or the peak and the trough. You know, there's ways to mess with that. But for now, I'm happy with what we just did. So that tells me it's kind of a relief to see this, because it tells me that my tracks were recorded okay. They're recorded decently. They're not awful. You know, they're amateur, but they're not. They could be way, way worse. Now, one thing I can tell you, if you look at these guitar waveforms, in the early stages, I was normalizing everything because my trouble was like making a rough mix. So I'm like, oh, if I normalize the guitar, it's loud enough to sit with the drums. I don't have to do all this boosting and stuff, which I should have just done an output gain to make the guitar loud enough to sit with the guitar with the bass. But instead I normalized. So these are all normalized and I can't go back. You know, if you normalize and then you save your session and you leave and come back, you can't undo that, as far as I know. You can undo it in the same session, but anyway, that's another aside. I'm really good at going into these tangents, right? It's like my thing. It'd be like tangent man. So again, before we leave, what I want to do is summarize. This is kind of my own mental process and for you as the viewer. Early on, we cleaned up our folders. Step 1, we cleaned up all the tracks. We put them into folders. We colored them and organized them so it looks like you see it now. The next thing we did was... Second thing we did was gate. We gated the kick so that we could, you know, do the volume up and down. Increase and decrease the volume and not get all the in-between sounds, so we could selectively give more oomph to the kick. And we did that before we did this audio statistic thing, so that the plugin, the statistic plugin that we worked with in 2 separate videos, was reading that kick the pure kick and not all that extra stuff in between. I mean, it does, but it's mostly just, looking at the meat of those kick drum tracks. So it's important that you do that gating first. And then in this lesson, we did what I tried to do in number 3. We combined the two signals and looked at the peak and made sure that it was right around. I mean, my target was -4 or -3, and we were at right about -4. So that's fine. That's good. So at this point, we can leave. Ideally, what we can do now is we can leave the main bass bus and the kick bus. We don't have to touch them. We don't have to. I mean, you can't boost them because they're at 0. You can boost through output gain and things like that, but we could bring them both back. In fact, what I'd want to do now. I mean, that -4 peak is actually perfect, and you saw that average was like at -25. So that means we have headroom. I'm going to leave it how it is, but what I could do if I needed to, if I notice right away, oh, this bass and kick is just overpowering the guitar, just it's unbelievably louder than everything else. You could selectively highlight them just by holding down Control. So I selected the first one, my bass, just by clicking here in the track area, and then I hit Control and click the kick bass. And then if I drag the volume of one of them, it drags the volume of the other. See? And I can do the double click and they both return to 0. So here, if I wanted to let's get that peak to -6. If you watch some other tutorials and they say you want your headroom you want to have 6 decibels of headroom, which is fine. I could actually go another 2 here. Go -2. Boom. And just leave that like that for the rest of the mix and not mess with that volume at all and mix around those two elements. That's a purely mixing philosophy. That's not a technical thing that I read in a manual that said if you want to mix rock music, you must put your kick and bass to -6 or -4 or what. It's a purely it's in my head as a sort of, like I said, a philosophy. My approach is let's get that kick and that bass right where I want them, and then we're going to kind of bring everything else to surround those two elements. And that's all you really need as a beginning mixer is some sort of idea of where to start with it and where to go with it. And where to go with it is kind of like you pull up another song, like in the early, I think in video 1, I said, this kind of has a Green Day feel. There's a couple of moments in the song where his voice and the chords and everything, it hits the kind of Green Day nerve in my brain. I'm like, oh, there's a little bit of Green Day in there. I mean, granted, we're nowhere near as good as Green Day, but it evokes Green Day to me. So I go and find a Green Day track or 2 or 3 tracks and using them as reference, and that's a term you'll hear a lot later, I can listen to those tracks and go, oh, okay, when he's singing, like when he really kicks up the vocals, the snare is like you can't even hear the snare anymore, but that kick is always right there. Or the other way around, the kick kind of, during the chorus, the kick kind of drops off, but that snare is always just boom, boom, right in the mix. So that's, essentially what a good mixer can do. Take the mix from a starting point and bring it somewhere. And in this case, I don't have a client that I'm mixing for necessarily. It's for my bandmates who, were no longer associated as a band. So this is sort of just for my own taste and to put out as like a memory project. So there's really no pressure for me. No one's telling me, hey, you got to make this sound like Green Day. That's just something that came to mind because the song evokes that artist. And that's it. So again, this was a rehash of episode 3. I don't want to call it Mixing with a Newb episode 4. So it was Mixing with a Newb part 3, part 2. That's an inside joke with my partner. Thank you for watching. I hope it wasn't too painful. I feel like I'm starting to get my pacing down a little bit better. My my metering of my voice and not getting hung up on too many side tangents. So please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you. And peace.